Family and friends, along with search and rescue teams, have been looking for Selena Not Afraid in about a 3 to 5 mile radius.
Selena Not Afraid was last seen around 2 o'clock on Wednesday at the eastbound I-90 rest area between Billings and Hardin.
Searchers have been looking for Not Afraid since New Year's Day when she was last seen.
Radio check, radio check.
Selena Not Afraid disappeared from a rest stop on New Year's Day in Montana's Bighorn County.
It's getting really cold. I want her home.
9 days later, and community-led search teams were still looking for the first clue that might lead them to her.
So we know our mission for today. We're looking for any sign of Selena, anything out of the ordinary. You know the drill. You guys been doing it, so.
This is Beartooth.
Beartooth.
Yeah.
How are you, buddy? We'll find our girl.
Okay.
Selena Not Afraid's case is an example of what Native women face. They are almost 3 times more likely to experience sexual violence compared to white women. And homicide is the 4th leading cause of death for those under 20. And the problems often continue even after death. According to a 2019 report, approximately half of all cases involving murdered Indigenous women in Montana have been misclassified for causes like suicide, overdose, or exposure.
Been on Bugsy, Teddy and his wife and their baby Little Light, Mikey Plainbowl, Garrett, our current active search right now, Hub Williamson. Bonnie Three Irons, 2017, we recovered her. The next one was Henny Scott. Last year we recovered her. Casera stops at Pretty Places. She was found, I believe, by a deputy in town in somebody's yard. And now our recent active search is Selena. In all the previous cases that I've been involved with, where the situation is like this here, it's always been a recovery. It's never been a happy ending.
Where is Selena? Where is she? Where's my grandbaby?
Native Americans make up 6.7% of Montana's population, but account for 26% of missing person reports. And while local officials claim that causes for these deaths and disappearances are varied, from drug trafficking to domestic violence, the one thing they all have in common is that they take place in a jurisdictional minefield. Depending on where someone is reported missing or where a victim is found, it could fall to either state, federal, or tribal authorities to investigate. And with that many intersecting agencies, there are plenty of cracks for these cases to fall through.
An Indian reservation, for all intents and purposes, is a sovereign nation. It is subject to completely different laws, governing bodies. They're like a country within a country. So a Bighorn County deputy can show up on a tribal member's doorstep on the reservation, and that tribal member can say, you have no right to be here, you have no jurisdiction here. It can be very difficult.
Responsibility might fall with the county sheriff's department, officers from the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs, or the tribal police. Sometimes the FBI also steps in. There are both too many agencies jockeying for authority and not enough resources to go around. In late 2019, the Crow tribe declared a state of emergency. Tribal Chairman AJ Not Afraid cited a list of issues, including the BIA's lack of officers and failure to address the murdered and missing women crisis. The Crow Reservation is roughly the size of Connecticut, but for years has only had 5 BIA officers. Recently, the tribe assembled its own sovereign police force, independent from the BIA.
We're between 2 communities right now. We currently have no radio service. We have no cell phone service. We have no ways, unless we had a sat phone, we wouldn't have any way to communicate with anybody. And that contributes. It's very wide open. It's very desolate out here. The I-90 corridor, anybody that's going to Denver, going to South Dakota, trying to get to the West Coast, it all travels right through here for the most part. So we get a lot of drug trafficking out on the interstate, and you know, with the crime, the drugs, the domestic violence, it's all a perfect breeding ground for people to go missing.
So we're going to go ahead and ask everybody if you could come a little bit close. We want to acknowledge all of the families who are here.
In downtown Hardin, a rally for the movement shows that Selena Not Afraid's disappearance is painfully familiar. Families gather to push for answers on their loved ones' suspicious deaths.
Why is it that we are more likely to be raped and murdered than go to college? Why is it that our young girls are just trying to survive? And so there are alarm bells that are ringing. What is going on?
The sheer number of Indigenous women that have been missing or murdered suggests an epidemic, but there isn't a comprehensive data set to confirm that. Desi Rodriguez-Lombert, a sociologist who researches data in the Indigenous communities, is working to quantify the sweep of the problem.
All right. Okay, Sarah stops Pretty Places. Tribes need to be building their own data sets. Our data systems have been erased and destroyed over centuries of colonization. We have so many cases where our women are being misclassified racially as white, as Black, as Asian, as Latina, and not actually American Indian, and certainly not as citizens of different nations. I know every single one of you here have not had justice for your loved one.
When I reported her missing, nobody helped me. The only response was, maybe she's drinking somewhere. What does that say to our people?
They said Henny was just one of those crazy little girls that would take off. So what?
We would never accept this if, for example, these young girls were non-Indian. But yet here in southeastern Montana, we've accepted that negligence is okay. What is happening with all of these systems that are supposed to be in place to keep people safe?
Rodriguez-Lombert knows this issue firsthand. Her own niece disappeared in August of 2019.
Sarah was last seen alive here in Hardin. She was at a house party with some friends, cousins. It was the summer she turned 18.
Somebody knows something!
Family, friends, and members of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Group held the Justice March for Sarah Stops Pretty Places, whose body was found in Hardin on August 29th.
After 5 days, a body was found. She was basically a Jane Doe here in the Bighorn County morgue for days. Finally, the medical examiner in Billings did a dental match, was able to determine that it was her. And so now here we are, 6 months later. Her cause of death has now been declared officially as undetermined. There are no leads.
When it comes to inconsistent investigations and lack of information, Rodriguez-Lombert isn't alone. Many families have been waiting to get answers for years.
My daughter, Allison Highwolf, today would be her 5th year of passing away.
Highwolf was found dead in a motel room in Hardin. There are no leads in her case either.
The BIA officer had told us that we couldn't go see her, that she was already in a morgue. He didn't give me very much information, just the fact that there was a motel fire and she was there, and she was there by herself. They determined it smoke inhalation and undetermined. I feel deeply in my heart that she was murdered, that my daughter was murdered. It's not recognized by the Sheriff's Department in Hardin, Montana. We ask questions and they've never been answered.
Tonight, the search for Selena Not Afraid has come to a sad end. Her body discovered less than a mile away from where she disappeared.
Why was she not found sooner? Well, authorities in the area say that this place is big country and things can go unnoticed.
Somehow, this young woman who is otherwise healthy turns up dead in a sagebrush on her own accord. Maybe there's nobody that we can get for murder, but there is something that led to this young woman, to her dying and her body being found on the side of the road in a sagebrush.
If the tribe is able to take back over its law enforcement, increase its numbers, and do a better job of taking care of its own, of the reservation, I believe that it'll have an immediate impact on making things better.
There's also been national recognition of the problem. In October, President Trump signed 2 bills into law, the Not Invisible Act and Savannah's Act, named for Savannah LaFontaine Graywind, a 22-year-old Spirit Lake Nation woman who was found murdered in 2017. The laws direct the Department of Justice to create more coordinated law enforcement and data collection in response to missing Indigenous persons.
We want to respect tribal sovereignty and the tribe's ability to maintain their authority and their public safety structure the way they'd like to maintain it. But it also adds complication, and so what we need to do and what's being done at the national level will be to try to figure out ways that even though we have different jurisdictions involved, to be sure they work together more fluidly and more seamlessly so that responses can come quicker and can hopefully be more effective.
We are so used to our people's deaths being classified as exposure, suicide, accidents, and not actually being investigated as suspicious. There's something happening here. We are sovereign nations that exist within another sovereign nation. So there's complexities there in terms of whose sovereignty reigns, but ultimately we have self-determination. Bighorn County is the focal point of the MMIW work that we are doing right now in Montana because we have lost so many women recently. We're losing women too frequently here in this small part of Montana. I'm a social demographer, so I'm trained in both sociology and demography. And what I do is I try to think through ways to partner with Native communities and tribal nations to build and reclaim our data systems.
Because we have to do what we can do for each other.
In the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women database, we have, all sorts of different entries, that we're collecting, variables that we're collecting on these cases. One of the biggest flags that we found is that Bighorn County has one of the highest numbers across the country of any county. There's a puzzle here. There are questions that need answered. And if anything, I'm a researcher, and this is in my own backyard. We live in the data age right now. Everything about us is being collected, whether we like it or not. Personally, I think as a critical data scholar, I think that's very wrong. I think it's also very wrong that our Native nations are so removed from that nexus of kind of data power. There's so much being collected on us, but not by us and for us. And we need the data. The numbers are what drive policy. The numbers are what drive investment. If we're not being counted, or if we're being misclassified, or if the data aren't in our control or we don't have access to it, then we have these various layers of continued kind of barriers to self-determination. That self-determination extends to data. It has to extend to data. And so now tribes are facing, this kind of new frontier. How do they build sovereign data systems? How do they leverage, partnerships and linkages with all these existing data sets that are out there? And how do they build these data systems to drive their own policies, to keep their people safe, to ensure that their children have a better future? And so that, to me, is this exciting new data frontier for American Indians and Alaska Natives and for our tribal nations.